A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret, and after the people of that place recognized him, they sent word throughout the region and brought all who were sick to him and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. Wow, I just love this part of Matthew's gospel, and the lectionary has certainly given us a chunk. There's about 6 things that we could alight on this morning with this text, but what sticks out to me is 2 things. One, and I'll just say the first, is the image of Peter being drawn out of the boat, the disciples' misunderstanding. And just to reorient us in the story, we've just had the feeding of the 5,000, and yet we seem to have short-term memory issues with these disciples, and probably also with these disciples in our day. But we see a miraculous thing that God does, and we are in awe, and we say, "Truly, you are God's Son," and all that, where we see miraculous things happen. And then, 5 minutes later, or 24 hours later, or 12 hours later, God has a demonstration of God's presence, spirit, glory, miraculous power, and we are surprised all over again, as though we haven't seen it. And so you get that today with the disciples saying, "Wow, really, you are God's Son," even though he just fed 5,000 with a couple of loaves and some fish. So I'm struck by the attention deficit in the disciples, but by Jesus inviting Peter challenging and saying, "If it's you, then have me walk on the water." Jesus says, "Come," and he walks on the water. And just that moment of, doing it, and what stops Peter from continuing to do it? It's not Jesus' inattention. It's not Jesus dropping his end of the oar, as it were. It's Peter deciding in a way that he knows better than God, and getting freaked out. And of course, he's the one who steps away from what it is that Jesus is doing in him. And I wonder how many times we as the church writ large have done that. Perhaps this is on my mind at this time because of some very large things and wonderful and exciting and inspiring things that the church, not only St. James Cathedral, but the whole Diocese of Chicago, is being invited into in this moment where we are deciding whether we believe God. When God has our churches growing and granted across our whole diocese, there are different ways that growth looks, but everyone I speak to speaks of something that God is doing in their midst. And so are we, the church, like Peter, able to believe, at least for a little while, that God really means it when God says, come on out of the boat, walk on the water with me? Can we believe that, or do we know better than God? And are we ready to put our own skepticism and fear in front of what God is inviting us into, in front of God's invitation? So there's that. And the other piece that just sort of framing that piece where Peter is drawn onto the water is that Jesus performs the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. He sends the disciples on, and he goes up the mountain to pray by himself. it's so important for us as we embark on attempting to take our part in God's work in this world, as we embark on attempting to be a vehicle of God's grace, not only in our midst, in our congregation, but in the broader context in the world. We have to remember that none other than Jesus himself said, okay, I need a minute to refresh and restore. So it's not about nonstop action. It is about also going away to a place, whatever that looks like for you, and to a place of prayer, often described by mystics and Rowan Williams recently. Prayer as a means of not us giving God a bunch of petitions, but prayer as a way for letting God get at us. Prayer is removing everything in between us and God, and letting God get at us at the deepest and most restorative level. And so for you, prayer looks like whatever it means to get rid of the other things that get in the way of your availability to God and God's Spirit in you. For Jesus, it was going away to a silent place. And then finally, the other bookend of this story, where he steps out of the boat and the people who are in need, who are suffering, who are searching for and pining for, longing for healing, and they know that Jesus has it. Reaching forward, if only we could touch the hem. They touch the hem and they are healed. That is also an important and driving image for us. We don't have to go out and invent things for us to do in the name of Christ. The world knows and senses where God is. The world and those in need reach forth their hands to us. We're hearing sirens go by as I finish this message. The world, when they reach out toward us, we can be that vehicle of grace that brings healing and brings greater life, greater joy, greater love into the world. May God be with you this day. May God bless you and keep you this day and always. Amen.